On this Mother's Day 2024, I have been thinking about all of the nurturing forces in my life, beginning with my mother and my father, my siblings, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and next to them, I've been thinking of the so many people who have poured into my life. And I'm sure this is true for most, if not all of you, that there have been many people, an abundant number of people who have poured into your lives, bringing you to the point at which you are in this very moment. You know, early on in my ministry, I couldn't preach worth a flip. And I didn't preach that often. I was an associate, big church, with a powerful senior pastor who could preach very, very well. And so I preached maybe once, twice, sometimes at the most 4 times a year. And I'll never forget one Sunday it came my time to preach. And I was a little anxious about it. And so I arrived extra early at the church before anyone else. And I remember going upstairs to my church office, and I opened up the door, and I looked over at my organized, clean, neat desk. And I noticed right there on the center of the desk, there was this yellow sticky note that I didn't put there. A friend, mentor, someone that I admired greatly, had taken the time to write a note, and on that note, in her faint handwritten pencil, were these 4 words: I believe in you. I believe in you. These are some of the most, when they're shared sincerely, I believe that these are some of the most powerful words that you can share and or receive. Now, to believe someone is one thing. When you believe someone, you think that you believe that they're credible, that what they say to you, when you believe them, what they say to you, you believe to be true. But when someone believes in you, it sets you free. It's so empowering because they believe in your abilities, your capabilities, and your potential. And most importantly, get this, remember this, it's a one-liner. When someone believes in you, you begin to believe in yourself. Say that with me. When someone believes in you, you begin to believe in yourself. Which leads me to talk about, from John's Gospel, the crucial and critical role of Jesus' mother. I believe in this story, we learn that Jesus had a crucial role in helping her son live out his purpose and his potential. You know, one wonders if Jesus would have ever gotten his ministry off the ground without her. And today's story, called The Wedding at Cana, is found early in the Gospel of John. We're in what chapter? Remember? Chapter 2. And it's in chapter 2 of John's Gospel that we see the very first act of Jesus' public ministry. Now that got me curious. There are 4 Gospels, say them with me: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay? I got to thinking, what's the first public act of Jesus in all the Gospels? So I have a slide for you so you can take this information home with you. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus' first public act is his Sermon on the Mount. And in Mark's Gospel, it's an exorcism. The first public act of Jesus' ministry is he's going to cast out a demon. In Luke's Gospel, the first public act is Jesus goes home. He goes back to his home of Nazareth, and he preaches his first sermon, and he so threatens the hometown village and those who live there that they try to throw him off a cliff, but he escapes. But in John's gospel, this story that's unique to John and John alone, the first public act of Jesus' ministry is this miracle, this sign where Jesus turns water into wine. Jesus is with his disciples. He's also with his mother, and they are all wedding guests in a town called Cana, which is about 9 miles away from his hometown, Jesus' hometown of Nazareth. And like Nazareth, Cana is a poor person's village. It's a peasant village. And in ancient Palestine, for first century peasant people, weddings, you need to know, weddings were a huge deal. I mean, it was a time to take off from work and to splurge and indulge and enjoy all the food and wine one wanted. And furthermore, in those days, a wedding lasted not just a weekend, it lasted an entire week. It was 7 days long. And it was a huge feast and a huge celebration, something that people would have gathered and looked forward to all year long. So, Mary, mother of Jesus, though, let me say, she's never called Mary in the Gospel of John. Her name's never mentioned. One wonders if her role may be more important than her name in this case. But Mary, mother of Jesus, notices that the wedding hosts have what? What's happened? You know the story. They what? They have run out of wine. Now, this is a major disaster. This would have brought great dishonor and shame to the family. And Mary, it's highly thought that she was a member of the family because she's there, and not only is she there, her son's there, and his friends, the disciples, are there. So she's probably a close relative or at least a close friend, and she's mortified. And she's concerned. She's tenderhearted. She's worried about the shame and disgrace that this family will have to endure. And so she comes up with an idea here, a solution. She turns to Jesus, her son, and she says to him these words, "They don't have any wine." And then Jesus does the oddest thing. Jesus responds in a kind of way we might not expect. He responds sort of like an aloof teenager being made to attend a wedding. And basically what he says is, "Not my problem, mother." I looked up the closest exact translation I could find, and it goes like this. Jesus says to his mother, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." What the heck is going on here? What an awkward story. And lots of ink has been spilled on what's really happening here, and it's really left to our interpretation. But I went to who I think personally has great scholarship on the Gospel of John, Caroline Lewis. And I've been reading many of her commentaries and books, and she writes extensively. She's a professor of biblical preaching. She writes extensively on John's Gospel and on this particular story. And what she says in this moment early on in John's Gospel is that Jesus, what John's Gospel is exposing and revealing is Jesus' humanity. He's just written a whole prologue about the Word made flesh, so Jesus is divine. But Jesus is also what? Human, the Word made flesh. And so she says that John's Gospel is highlighting the humanity of Jesus early on in the Gospel. You see, Jesus, he talks about the hour. My hour has not yet come. What's he alluding to? Crucifixion. That's right, James. Jesus knows, probably, that once he starts his public ministry, his death is going to be imminent. So he's equivocating a little bit. He's hesitating. My hour's not yet come. And Mary sees that he's ready. what does Mary see and know about Jesus that he doesn't see and know in that moment? You have to wonder. She would have nurtured him from birth up to adulthood. What had Jesus along the way during those years revealed to her so that she believes in her son? What does Mary see and know about Jesus that Jesus doesn't yet see and know? It reminds me of an innocent, simple story that preachers tend to share. And it's about this little boy and his family. And they woke up in the middle of the night and their house was in flames. It was burning down to the ground. It was a one-story home, and everybody made their way out except a small little boy. And so that he could be safe, they coaxed him to climb onto the roof. And then his mother walked outside. She's outside near the roof where the little boy is, and she's holding out her arms within reach. And she's saying to her little boy, so that he can save his own life, "Jump, and I will catch you." But all this little boy can see, flames and smoke and total blackness. And yet she continues to say to her little boy, "Jump, and I will catch you." And then the little boy says to his mother, "But I can't see you." And she replied, "But I can see you, and that's all that matters." Caroline Lewis points out that Jesus' push into public ministry is not a 40-day wilderness ordeal. You remember? In Luke and Matthew and Mark, Jesus is, before his public ministry, he's tested and tempted, and he's driven into the desert. She points out there's no desert story in John's gospel. And the test for Jesus as he launches his ministry is through the coaxing of his mother. Jesus' mother ushers him into initiating his ministry. You get the sense that she's encouraging Jesus to be who he truly is. Like a mother saying to her child in kindergarten on the first day of school, "Go on, you can do it. I believe in you." So like any good mother or parent, this mother of Jesus kind of has to look over his awkward moments, And here's what she does. She tells the servants at the wedding party, great motherly advice here. She says, "Do whatever he," meaning Jesus, "do whatever Jesus tells you." And the servants do. And here's what happens. Abundance, grace upon grace, and the wine just pours and pours and pours. We've got 6 jugs here, okay? They're really vats. They were huge. These were used as a Jewish cleansing ritual. And Jesus tells the servants to fill these jugs to the brim with water. And each of these vats, we're told, would have held about 20 to 30 gallons. So I brought a prop with me today. Here's a gallon of water, okay? Now imagine 20 or 30 of these times 6. According to my calculations, that's about 1,000 bottles of wine. But it's not about the wine. It's about the abundance. In and through Jesus Christ, we have grace upon grace, more than we could ever conjure or imagine. Last Sunday, if you were here, it was Confirmation Sunday, and our young people that joined the church are now going to be serving lemonade. So be sure and drop by. But last Sunday we were talking about discipleship and how it happens in relationships. And we were highlighting that each of these young people had been mentored. And the question I asked those gathered or those tuning in was, who has mentored you and who are you mentoring? Now today my question goes deeper. And the question for you is, who has believed in you? And who do you believe in? It's a powerful question that makes all the difference in Christian discipleship. Because when someone believes in us, what happens? We begin to believe in ourselves. And then some people are like, well, what about, you're a sinner. We have focused so much on our sinfulness in the church that we've forgotten about our original goodness. When you go to Genesis, the first chapter, what we learn is that you and I and every other human being we encounter, we've been created in the image of God. And what did God do? When God looked at all that God had created, God called it not sinful, but God called it what? Good. Do we have a proclivity to sin? You betcha. But our original nature is good. And any good parent knows. If you want to bring the best out in your child, you don't focus on what they get wrong. You focus on their goodness. So how, church, servants of Jesus, you and I see people makes a world of difference. We get so focused on how horrible people are in this world that we forget to point out their goodness. Did you know that the mother of Jesus appears only 2 times in John's gospel? At the beginning of his ministry and at the very end. The only other time next to this wedding story that the mother of Jesus appears is at the foot of the cross. She's the nurturing force. She brackets his entire ministry. She's the nurturing force at the beginning of his career when he turns water into wine, and she's the nurturing force as he pours out his life for the world. Speaking of bracketing, Sarah Scott, at the beginning of my meditation, she read our scripture for us on this wedding at Cana. And she and a good friend, Susan Cooper, just recently traveled all the way out to Los Altos, California to attend a retreat, which just reminds us we never outgrow the need to be nurtured in God. And retreats are wonderful things to attend because we change. We get out of our normal setting and we have an opportunity to sort of be recreated in God. So she and Susan traveled out to be with Gregory Boyle and other retreatants. And she's going to share a story with you about how her way of seeing changed through the teaching of the gospel by Gregory Boyle. A little bit about Sarah Scott. She's a mother of 3, a son and 2 daughters. She is a grandmother of 6 and a great-grandmother of 7. She's a member of this church. She's a dear friend. She's a fantastic cook and a wonderful host. In fact, this Tuesday at her home, she'll be hosting and entertaining and feeding the church staff here at First United Methodist of Gulfport. Sarah, if you'll come on up and share what revelations and insights you've received lately.
On this Mother's Day, I hear my own mother's voice in my ear saying, Sarah Ann, just say thank you graciously and don't question the judgment of the one who paid you the compliment. Thank you graciously. The retreat center where we were is 38 acres just carved out of beauty and love. It's in the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains, about 18 miles west of San Jose, where my daughter lives. And my daughter is the one who transported Susan and I to the weekend retreat with Greg Boyles. His theme was cherished belonging, love in divided times. Now, unlike most organized gatherings, there was a lot of free time and a lot of time to think and reflect, as well as participate in the discussions that went on and his presentations. His example that resonated with me was the idea that God is, that we are cherished by God. And he mentioned God as not as a father loves a son or delights in a son or any of those other things, but he mentioned that God that is like the grandparent who cherishes the grandchild. Now, I can tell you that with my own children, I felt a love that I had never known before. And yet, they terrified me because I was responsible for their whole entire nutrition and the rest of their life and their adult upbringing, and they did very well on their own. I cherish them now. But when they were born, I didn't get an instruction manual, and all of this just scared me. But as the grandchildren came along, each one was a bucket of joy. I loved being a grandmother. I loved taking these little creatures and making them mine and things maybe their parents didn't approve of. One of my grandsons, introduced me to Gregory Boyle about 10 years ago. And in Greg Boyle's speaking, one of the things that he said was that besides that God thinks of you and delights in you the way a grandparent delights in the grandchild, besides that, he says, God thinks you're perfect. And I thought, well, isn't that nice? It's not within my comfort zone to sit at a table and talk to strangers. But it is within Susan's comfort zone, and so I was safe. I was in a safe place. Except on the Sunday morning, the last Sunday morning of the retreat, we were at breakfast, and Susan, when I arrived at the table, she was already engaged in a conversation with the only other person in the table. Well, that was okay, because then I could entertain my own thoughts and not have to participate. And a lovely woman from Santa Cruz, sat down and started to talk. And we had so many things that we told each other our life stories, and that took a while, especially for me. And we talked about our common experiences of having left brain educations that we translated in a right brain employment. And we talked about the fresh air that Greg Boyle had brought to both of us. And so then I look up and everybody's gone from the dining room except she and I and maybe a few people around. So she takes off to go to the center where our next session is. And I stopped to get a cup of coffee in a Go cup. In my haste, I picked up 2 lids instead of 1, and as I tried to put the lid on, I spilled the coffee all over the dining room floor. And then this sort of thing happens to me a lot. And so after going to tell the people in the kitchen area what I had done, I turned around and I saw a man who was with the retreat, one of our fellow retreaters. A man with kind eyes who smiled, and I'm blurting out all of this stuff I've done that I told him. I rolled my eyes and I just said what a mess I had made, and the 2 lids, and then someone has to clean this up, and I didn't have a mop, and he smiled and says, "But God thinks you're perfect." And then I got it.
Give her a hand.
Love you.
And for you, a yellow sticky. Years ago, I heard a preacher say, when you preach a sermon, say something on Sunday that will matter on Monday. So our action step for Mother's Day week and moving forward is this. As servants of God, let's believe in others more than they believe in themselves. Because the time is now. God's kingdom is here, and it's waiting to be realized in full, first in and through Jesus Christ, and next to him, in and through us, his servants. So be it, and so it is. Amen.